Hello and welcome to The Real Beef. I'm Don Keith. Illegal immigration from the third world has surged across the global West in recent decades, transforming societies in ways that are destructive and irreversible. From the United States to Europe, borders have been effectively dismantled, allowing millions of migrants to enter unchecked. This phenomenon is not a random occurrence, but a calculated strategy, really, supported by Western leaders, corporatists, and globalists who stand to gain immense power, wealth, and control. Of course, they cloak their advocacy in terms of compassion and economic necessity, but the reality suggests a darker motive. A global conspiracy to reshape demographics, economies, and politics for elite benefit. If it's not a conspiracy, then the simultaneous nature of this mass migration across Western civilization demands explanation. Why now? And why everywhere at once? So let's look at some of the beneficiaries of uncontrolled migration, their potential game plans, including fostering chaos for war, profiteering, exploiting new consumer markets, manipulating voting blocks, and using it as an excuse for higher taxes on natives and other nefarious reasons. And I also want to examine the devastating negative impacts on Western societies, from violent crimes to cultural erosion and the suppression of free speech. It certainly seems like there's a vast web of self-interest Western leaders, corporatists, and globalists who support mass third world migration because it serves their interest in maintaining power and accumulating wealth, often at the expense of native populations. Corporatists, in particular, benefit from a flood of low-wage labor that depresses salaries and boosts profits. For instance, businesses lobby politicians to adopt pro-immigration policies to reduce labor costs, as evidenced by corporate influence on mass immigration agendas. This influence creates a surplus workforce, allowing companies to exploit migrants in sectors like agriculture, construction, and services, while native workers face job displacement and wage stagnation. This economic model relies on immigrants filling roles that increase GDP through sheer numbers. But this masks the long-term cost to social cohesion. Globalists, including international organizations and elites, view migration as a tool for dissolving national boundaries and fostering a borderless world order. The United Nations Global Compact on Migration, adopted in 2018, promotes safe, regular, and dignified migration, effectively encouraging mass inflows under the guise of sustainable development. This simultaneous occurrence across the West, seen in Europe's migrant crisis, ongoing U.S. border surges, and similar patterns in Canada and Australia, suggests coordination rather than coincidence. Theories like the Great Replacement posit that elites are engineering demographic shifts to replace white Christian majority populations with third world migrants, eroding national identities and making societies more pliable to global control. While dismissed as conspiracy by mainstream sources, the theory gains traction amid evidence of strategic migration as a weapon to destabilize nations, as outlined in analysis of forced displacement for political ends. The fact is, the Great Replacement theory isn't a theory at all. It's a fact because we're witnessing it in real time. There is something very sinister at play here, and it appears multifaceted and nefarious. One possibility is creating chaos to enable war profiteering. Uncontrolled migration fuels social tensions, ethnic conflicts, and instability, which defense contractors and elites exploit through arms sales and reconstruction contracts. For example, rising migrant-related violence in Europe has led to increased military and security spending, benefiting those who pretend it's all about compassion while profiting from the fallout. Corporatists also see migrants as new revenue streams, not just as cheap labor, but as consumers who expand markets for goods and services. They believe immigrants boost economic growth by increasing demand because some studies, likely funded by them, show that they enhance productive capacity and GDP, though this completely ignores the strain on infrastructure. Leftist politicians, meanwhile, view migrants as a reliable voting bloc, manipulable through woke virtue signaling on issues like diversity and asylum. In France, immigration has shifted electoral support, with migrants often aligning with left-wing parties that promise protections, eroding conservative bases. Governments use migration as an excuse for tax hikes, claiming additional revenue is needed to support those poor migrants, forcing natives to subsidize the influx. While some analysis shows net fiscal costs from low-skilled migrants, elites frame it as a humanitarian imperative to justify higher taxes. Other nefarious reasons include demographic engineering to counter aging populations with fertile migrant groups, diluting cultural homogeneity for easier governance, and using migration to suppress dissent by labeling critics as racists. Examples of this are plenty. In the U.S., proposals for mass deportation highlight how immigration sustains industries, with removal projected to reduce GDP by 4 to 6%, benefiting corporations that rely on the status quo. In Europe, the EU's push for more migrants to fill labor gaps ignores native employment, pointing to a deliberate preference for third world imports. These patterns indicate, yes, elites benefit from chaos, consumers' votes, and taxes, while native societies bear the brunt. And it's quite obvious considering none of these elites ever mention the negative impacts of immigration across the West. I mean, the consequences of this uncontrolled migration are catastrophic, manifesting in crime spikes, economic burdens, cultural decline, and threats to freedom. In the UK, mass rape scandals involving grooming gangs of predominantly Pakistani men highlight the dangers. The Rotherham scandal, spanning from 1997 to 2013, saw at least 1,400 girls abused, with authorities failing to act due to fears of racism accusations. Similar patterns emerged in Rochdale and other towns where migrants exploited vulnerable natives. Then, of course, there's mass casualty terrorism in places like Germany's 2016 Berlin Christmas market attack, where a Tunisian migrant, Anis Amri, drove a truck into crowds, killing 12 and injuring dozens in an ISIS-inspired assault. Knife attacks by migrants have become epidemic across Europe, including the 2024 Solingen stabbing, 3 dead by a Syrian asylum seeker, and a 2025 a Schaffenburg incident where an Afghan killed a child and a man. Is it any wonder that anti-immigrant sentiment is growing among Europeans? Then there's the economic strains, including tax hikes to cover immigration costs. In the UK, asylum accommodation costs exceed £6 million daily, leading to fiscal pressures and proposed increases in fees and taxes. Overcrowded migrant hotels exacerbate this. As of 2025, over 32,000 asylum seekers occupy 218 hotels, straining resources and communities. Meanwhile, the government is cutting winter fuel allowances for seniors, forcing them to freeze, and it has seriously considered cutting disability payments. But the effects of immigration don't stop there. Cultural decline, evident in the erosion of native traditions, is also a symptom. Christianity's share in Europe has dropped 9% from 2010 to 2020, while Islam grew fastest globally, driven by migration and higher birth rates. This shift fosters the rise of radical Muslim extremist terror cells, such as ISIS affiliates in Europe responsible for attacks like Paris in 2015 and Brussels in 2016. In the UK, networks linked to groups like Al-Muhajirun plot violence. So, I'm not really seeing any benefit at all to this immigration Trojan horse that's sweeping planet Earth. But probably the most dangerous effect of immigration on the West is the assault on free speech that has come along with it, particularly in the UK, where criticizing immigration, migrants, or Islam leads to arrests. In fact, roughly 30 arrests per day for speech-related offenses. Hundreds of them facing charges for online posts with sentences for, the very, really subjective crime of stirring racial hatred. Police threaten extradition for foreign critics, chilling dissent and enforcing pro-migration orthodoxy. Just imagine that for a moment. If Keir Starmer's Gestapo arrested someone like myself because I exercise my free speech on American soil to criticize his tyrannical government, I don't think President Trump would respond too kindly to that. But there's a lot of specific cases to illustrate the severity of Starmer's crackdown on speech. For instance, prominent journalist and activist Tommy Robinson was arrested just this month at Luton Airport on suspicion of grievous bodily harm related to an alleged assault at St. Pancras Station, which was really an assault on him. But during his subsequent questioning by the Metropolitan Police, he was also detained and interrogated under the Online Safety Act and Communications Act for social media posts, including reposting an old Daily Mail article about a primary school in East London where no children's first language was English. Authorities questioned him on whether he implied Bengali girls wearing headscarves were not Cockney, tying it to anti-Muslim sentiment. Another example is Peter Lynch, a 61-year-old grandfather arrested for violent disorder during the 2024 Rotherham riots outside a migrant hotel, where he yelled at police, calling them scum and child killers while holding a placard. He was sentenced to 2 years and 8 months and tragically died in prison by hanging himself. That's on Keir Starmer and this Labor government 100%. They bear responsibility for Peter Lynch's death, in my opinion. Additionally, a man was arrested in East London for a racially aggravated public order offense after posting a video online complaining about Palestinian flags in his neighborhood and criticizing the influx of immigrants. Lucy Connolly, wife of a former Tory councillor, was jailed for 31 months for stirring racial hatred on X, where she called for mass deportations and saying that she could care less if, migrant hotels burned to the ground following the Southport attacks. These cases demonstrate a pattern where online expressions of frustration with immigration policies result in severe penalties, stifling public discourse and punishing citizens for voicing concerns about cultural and societal changes. It's not just changes, it's erosion. There is a reason that the freedom of speech is given to Americans in the very First Amendment of our Constitution. It's because the First Amendment and our speech protects all of our other freedoms. So to lose that in any country is truly the most dangerous of all. But this is the only way that these elites can silence opposition and dissent, is to take that freedom away, because their ideas are terrible. And we all know it. We also know that illegal immigration is, in fact, a tool for elites to enrich themselves and control the populations. It's never been about compassion. It's always about power. The West must reclaim its borders to preserve its cultures, economies, and freedoms before irreversible damage ensues. The fate of the West and the future of the entire planet Earth depends on it.